A president tested navigating crisis from day one. Joe Biden assumed the presidency facing a perfect storm of crises. The COVID-19 pandemic raged, leaving millions unemployed and a nation yearning for stability. The economy teetered on the brink of recession. Political polarization had reached a fever pitch, fueled by the tumultuous years of the Trump administration. Abroad, global tensions simmered. Biden, a seasoned politician with decades of experience, campaigned on a message of unity and competence. He promised to restore the soul of America and bring a sense of normalcy back to the White House. His initial approval ratings reflected this desire for stability, with the majority of Americans expressing confidence in his leadership. However, the honeymoon period proved short-lived. The pandemic persisted, mutating into new variants that challenged even the most optimistic projections. The economy, while showing signs of recovery, struggled to regain pre-pandemic strength. Inflation soared, driven by supply chain disruptions and pent-up consumer demand. These challenges, coupled with a deeply divided Congress and a relentless news cycle, made for a tumultuous first year in office. Biden, despite his initial popularity, found himself grappling not only with the crises themselves, but also with the weight of public expectation. The road ahead would be anything but smooth. Legislative victories, a raft of bills in a divided Washington. Despite the challenges, the Biden administration achieved significant legislative victories in its first 2 years. These legislative wins, passed by a slim Democratic majority in Congress, represented trillions of dollars in spending and addressed a wide range of policy areas, from pandemic relief to infrastructure to climate change. First and foremost was the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, passed just weeks into Biden's presidency. This sweeping relief package provided direct payments to most Americans, expanded unemployment benefits, and allocated billions to vaccine distribution and school reopenings. It was a crucial lifeline for millions struggling amidst the pandemic's economic fallout. Following the rescue plan came the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a bipartisan achievement that had eluded lawmakers for years. This landmark legislation allocated billions for roads, bridges, public transit, broadband internet expansion, and clean energy projects. It represented the largest investment in American infrastructure in decades. Then came the CHIPS and Science Act, a $280 billion investment in domestic semiconductor manufacturing and scientific research. This bill, passed with bipartisan support, aimed to bolster American competitiveness in the global technology race and reduce reliance on foreign chip makers. Finally, in a major victory for the Biden administration, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act. This $750 billion bill, passed without a single Republican vote, contained the largest ever federal investment in fighting climate change. It also aimed to lower prescription drug costs and reduce the deficit. These legislative achievements, passed amidst a deeply divided political landscape, represented a significant accomplishment for the Biden administration. They addressed pressing needs, invested in the future, and fulfilled key campaign promises. The disconnect why success didn't translate to soaring approval. Despite these legislative successes, President Biden's approval ratings remained stubbornly low throughout his presidency. This disconnect between policy achievements and public perception puzzled many political observers. While Biden could point to a long list of legislative wins, they seemed to do little to move the needle with voters. Several factors contributed to this disconnect. The lingering effects of the pandemic, particularly the economic fallout and persistent inflation, cast a shadow over the Biden presidency. Supply chain disruptions and rising prices eroded consumer confidence, despite low unemployment and a strong labor market. Furthermore, the deeply polarized political climate meant that Biden's legislative victories were often met with partisan gridlock and fierce opposition from Republicans. The highly partisan nature of American politics made it difficult for Biden to receive credit for his accomplishments. as even bipartisan wins like the infrastructure bill were often overshadowed by partisan battles. Additionally, the Biden administration struggled at times to effectively communicate its accomplishments to the American people. The complexity of the legislative process and the sheer volume of bills passed made it challenging to distill these wins into clear, concise messages that resonated with voters. The administration also faced a constant barrage of negative coverage from conservative media outlets, which often downplayed or outright dismissed Biden's successes. This constant stream of negative messaging, coupled with the administration's communication challenges, contributed to a perception gap between Biden's achievements and public opinion. The Afghanistan withdrawal, a turning point in public perception. While several factors contributed to the gap between Biden's legislative record and his approval ratings, the chaotic withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan in August 2021 stands out as a pivotal moment. The images of the hurried evacuation, the Taliban's swift takeover of Kabul, and the desperate pleas of Afghan allies seeking escape left a lasting mark on Biden's presidency. The withdrawal, while fulfilling a campaign promise to end America's longest war, was widely criticized for its execution. The Biden administration faced accusations of poor planning, inadequate intelligence, and a failure to anticipate the rapid collapse of the Afghan government. The scenes from Kabul, broadcast around the world, dealt a significant blow to Biden's image as a steady, experienced leader. The administration's handling of the withdrawal raised questions about its competence and its ability to navigate complex foreign policy challenges. The fallout from Afghanistan had a tangible impact on Biden's approval ratings, which plummeted in the weeks following the withdrawal. While his approval numbers eventually rebounded somewhat, the damage to his public standing was undeniable. The Afghanistan withdrawal served as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of foreign policy and the potential for even well-intentioned decisions to have unintended consequences. Section 5. Age and fitness, a recurring theme in the Biden presidency. From the outset of his campaign, President Biden's age was a topic of discussion. At 78, he became the oldest person ever sworn in as President of the United States. While Biden projected an image of vigor and experience, his age inevitably became a recurring theme throughout his presidency. Opponents seized on moments where Biden appeared to stumble or misspeak, using them as evidence that he was mentally unfit for the demanding job of president. These attacks, often amplified by conservative media, sought to paint a picture of Biden as a doddering, out-of-touch figure. The Biden campaign and later the White House vehemently denied these assertions. They pointed to Biden's grueling campaign schedule, his ability to handle the pressures of the presidency, and his long record of public service as evidence of his fitness to serve. However, the issue of Biden's age persisted, fueled by a steady drumbeat of negative coverage and the president's own occasional gaffes. These gaffes, while often minor and easily explained, were magnified by his opponents and presented as evidence of cognitive decline. The age question presented a unique challenge for the Biden presidency. It was a sensitive topic, one that could not be easily dismissed or ignored. The White House had to walk a fine line between projecting an image of strength and vitality while also acknowledging the reality of Biden's age. This balancing act proved challenging at times. The constant scrutiny of Biden's every move and utterance created an environment where even the smallest misstep could be seized upon and amplified by his critics. The age issue, while often overblown by Biden's opponents, nevertheless cast a shadow over his presidency and contributed to a perception of him as a transitional figure rather than a transformative one. Section 6. Inflation and the economy. A persistent drag on approval ratings. Throughout Biden's presidency, the economy, and more specifically the issue of inflation, loomed large over his approval ratings. Despite presiding over a period of relatively low unemployment and strong job growth, Biden consistently received low marks from voters on his handling of the economy. This disconnect stemmed, in large part, from the persistent and painful rise in prices for everyday goods and services. Supply chain disruptions, fueled by the lingering effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, drove up costs for everything from groceries and gasoline to cars and housing. While these factors were largely outside of Biden's control, they had a tangible impact on the lives of ordinary Americans who felt the pinch of higher prices at the grocery store, the gas pump, and the checkout line. This economic anxiety, coupled with the sense that the Biden administration wasn't doing enough to address it, weighed heavily on the president's approval ratings. The Biden administration argued that its policies, including the American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, were laying the groundwork for a more robust and equitable economy in the long term. They pointed to investments in clean energy, infrastructure, and manufacturing as evidence that they were addressing the root causes of inflation and building a more resilient economy for the future. However, these arguments often failed to resonate with voters struggling with the immediate challenges of making ends meet. The complex and long-term nature of the administration's economic policies stood in stark contrast to the immediate and painful reality of rising prices. The inflation issue highlighted the difficulty of governing in an era of hyper-partisanship and a 24/7 news cycle. While the Biden administration could point to legitimate successes in terms of job creation and economic growth, these achievements were often overshadowed by the more visceral and immediate concerns of voters struggling to keep up with the rising cost of living. Section 7. The Infrastructure Law, a bipartisan win with limited political upside. The passage of the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in November 2021 marked a rare moment of bipartisan accomplishment in an otherwise deeply divided Washington. The bill, which had been stalled for years, enjoyed the support of both Democrats and Republicans, who saw it as a much-needed investment in the nation's crumbling roads, bridges, and transit systems. The infrastructure bill was a signature achievement of the Biden presidency, fulfilling a key campaign promise and demonstrating that bipartisanship was still possible in an era of hyperpartisanship. The bill allocated billions of dollars for a wide range of projects, including roads and bridges, public transit, broadband internet expansion, clean energy initiatives, and water infrastructure improvements. Despite its bipartisan support and its potential to create jobs, boost the economy, and improve the lives of millions of Americans, the infrastructure bill failed to provide a significant boost to Biden's approval ratings. This lack of political payoff puzzled many observers who had expected the bill's popularity and its tangible benefits to translate into greater public support for the president. Several factors likely contributed to this disconnect. First, the infrastructure bill, despite its massive price tag, was passed at a time of heightened anxiety about inflation. The bill's passage coincided with a surge in consumer prices, which eroded the public's sense that the government was effectively addressing their economic concerns. Second, the infrastructure bill, while broadly popular, lacked the immediate and direct impact of policies like stimulus checks or child tax credits. The bill's benefits, while significant, were likely to be felt gradually over time, making it more difficult for the Biden administration to connect them directly to the president's leadership. Finally, the infrastructure bill, despite its bipartisan support, became somewhat overshadowed by the ongoing partisan battles over other issues, such as voting rights, climate change, and social spending. The constant churn of the news cycle and the highly polarized political climate made it difficult for the Biden administration to sustain a focused message about the bill's benefits and its significance. Section 8. The CHIPS Act and Inflation Reduction Act, investing in the future, battling present concerns. As the Biden administration moved into its second year, it faced the daunting task of addressing both long-term challenges and immediate crises. The CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, both passed in 2022, exemplified this dual focus, aiming to bolster American competitiveness in the global economy while also tackling pressing concerns like climate change and rising healthcare costs. The CHIPS Act, passed with bipartisan support, represented a $280 billion investment in domestic semiconductor manufacturing and scientific research. The bill aimed to reduce American reliance on foreign chip makers, particularly those in Taiwan, which had become a focal point of geopolitical tensions with China. The Inflation Reduction Act, a $750 billion package passed without a single Republican vote, represented the largest ever federal investment in fighting climate change. The bill included tax credits for clean energy, electric vehicles and energy-efficient homes, along with funding for clean energy research and development. Both bills, while significant in their own right, faced an uphill battle in terms of public perception. The CHIPS Act, while addressing a critical national security and economic concern, lacked the immediate, tangible impact of policies like stimulus checks or tax cuts. Its benefits, while potentially significant in the long term, were likely to be felt gradually over time. The Inflation Reduction Act, meanwhile, faced the challenge of living up to its name. While the bill included provisions aimed at lowering prescription drug costs and reducing the deficit, its impact on inflation was likely to be modest and gradual. The bill's passage coincided with a period of persistent inflation, which made it difficult for the Biden administration to convince voters that it was effectively addressing their economic concerns. Both the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act highlighted the challenges of governing in an era of short-term thinking and a 24/7 news cycle. The bills represented significant investments in the future, addressing critical challenges like climate change, global competitiveness, and healthcare costs. However, their long-term benefits and complex nature made it difficult for the Biden administration to translate them into immediate political gains. Section 9. The International Stage Navigating War in Ukraine and Tensions with China. The Biden administration entered office facing a complex and rapidly evolving international landscape. The war in Ukraine, launched by Russia in February 2022, upended the post-Cold War order and presented the United States with its most significant foreign policy crisis in decades. The Biden administration responded to the Ukraine crisis with a mix of diplomacy, military aid, and economic sanctions against Russia. The administration worked to rally international support for Ukraine, providing billions of dollars in military and humanitarian assistance to the embattled country. The administration's handling of the Ukraine crisis garnered praise from both Democrats and Republicans, who largely agreed on the need to support Ukraine and hold Russia accountable for its aggression. However, the crisis also highlighted the limits of American power and the challenges of navigating a multipolar world. Beyond Ukraine, the Biden administration also faced the daunting task of managing a complex and increasingly fraught relationship with China. The two superpowers, locked in a strategic competition for global influence, found themselves at odds on a range of issues, including trade, technology, human rights, and Taiwan. The Biden administration sought to strike a delicate balance with China, seeking to cooperate on issues of mutual interest, such as climate change and nuclear non-proliferation, while also pushing back against Beijing's assertive behavior in the Indo-Pacific region and its human rights abuses. The administration's China policy, like its handling of the Ukraine crisis, reflected the complexities of navigating a multipolar world. The United States, while still the world's most powerful country, could no longer dictate the terms of the international order. The Biden administration faced the challenge of managing relationships with both allies and adversaries. seeking to advance American interests while also recognizing the limits of American power. Section 10. Biden's legacy, a mixed bag awaiting history's verdict. As President Biden's term progresses, assessing his legacy presents a complex challenge. He inherited a nation grappling with unprecedented crises and a political landscape fractured by deep divisions. His legislative achievements, particularly in areas like pandemic relief, infrastructure, and climate change, are undeniable. Yet these successes have often been overshadowed by persistent economic anxieties, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and a relentless news cycle that often amplifies partisan divisions. History's judgment on Biden's presidency will likely be nuanced and multifaceted. His supporters will point to his legislative accomplishments, his steady hand on the tiller during a time of global uncertainty, and his commitment to restoring America's standing in the world. His detractors, however, will likely focus on the perceived missteps, the lingering economic challenges, and the sense that his presidency lacked a defining vision or direction. They will argue that he failed to heal the partisan divide or fundamentally address the underlying issues facing the nation. Ultimately, Biden's legacy will be shaped by factors beyond his control. The trajectory of the pandemic, the state of the global economy, and the outcome of future elections will all play a role in determining how his presidency is remembered. Only time will tell whether Biden's legislative achievements, his efforts to restore bipartisanship, and his handling of international crises will outweigh the challenges he faced and the criticisms leveled against him. What seems clear, however, is that Biden's presidency, much like the era it occupies, will be remembered for its complexity, its contradictions, and its enduring capacity to defy easy categorization.